Hello, and welcome back to Transylvaniacs, which is the chronicling of two friends trying to watch as many Dracula adaptations as possible, except for the month of December, where we took a break because it's the holidays.
Yeah, what you expect of us, you ingrates. Yeah, each episode we try to explore every film adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula A to Dracula Z. My name is Will.
I'm Colleen, and today we are joined for the first time, technically, by our good friend, Chris Melville. Chris, say hello.
Hello. Canonically here for the first time.
Exactly. We are thrilled to have you. Chris is, again, a good friend who all of us did a lot of film-related things in college, a lot of watching them. I believe you used to write for the same site that Will and my wife used to write for back in the day.
Yep.
Do those still exist on the internet, or are those gone forever?
Oh yeah, they're still out there.
Hell yeah.
I wrote a new review, Rooster Illusion, just this October.
Oh my god, really? Wait, I think I knew this.
I also did. We've been occasionally bringing them back just for our month-long celebration of Halloween that we do every October.
Octoberween, baby.
Chris has written a incredible series of retrospectives on almost every Scooby-Doo adaptation and iteration up to this point in the pages of Rooster Illusion. It's incredible.
I also, this past October, I did review a Dracula movie, technically.
Oh, yeah?
It was an El Santo movie. In which he invents a time machine to discover the treasure of Dracula.
Holy shit! I have to add that to our list because I have we're going to do that because I have El Santo versus the Vampire Women because that's a classic, and I think we have a magnet of that on our fridge. But that one's a little more related than just vampires.
He squares off against Count Dracula several times.
Yeah, I don't see why he wouldn't, frankly.
Yeah.
Natural enemies.
Natural enemies. Today, we are going to be looking at the 1958 Hammer horror film, The Horror of Dracula. It's going to be hard for me to say horror a lot because I have an upstate New York accent, and it's going to come out as horror.
Horror.
The Horror of Dracula, H-A-R-R. But I will do my best. And as mentioned before, this is our very first time recording this episode. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about this movie for the first time ever. Chris, I don't know if you've been listening, but we've had a couple episodes since we attempted to record this the first time, and we keep making this joke.
You haven't made any references to the fact that we've watched this movie already.
We have not.
No.
We have not.
Okay, the truth finally come out. We recorded the episode and then immediately canned it so that we could maintain the intellectual property rights to Chris Melville.
That's good. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that's precisely what happened.
Uh-huh. Very good. Yeah, so I'm glad you all appreciate the legal necessities that were required for keeping this extremely professional show intact. Before we get started on this actual film, Chris, kind of one of the many reasons we have you on today, other than the fact that you're smart and we like you, is that you are a bit of a connoisseur of the Hammer horror films. Is that correct?
I wouldn't use the word connoisseur just because I don't think people should, but but I have watched a lot of Hammer horror movies and I love them dearly. Yes.
Excellent. Do you mind kind of filling our five-hole listeners in on your history with the Hammer horror films and a little bit just about them in general? Because I personally I didn't know about this whole thing, which sounds completely stupid, considering I'm doing a podcast about Dracula, but I'm a Universal gal, okay? I've seen all of the Universal monster movies more than once, but I completely missed this entire genre, probably because it's British. I don't know. That's like my best excuse, but yeah. So in case anybody's in the same boat,
That's the case with most people.
cool.
And Universal is very rightly the iconic source for all of these monsters. They knocked it out of the park for try on most of them. Although I do agree with your assessment that aside from Lugosi, that version of Dracula is really dull.
It's so boring, dude.
It's a boring movie.
This version of Dracula is not dull, however.
Yes.
So Hammer was founded in the mid 30s and was making movies for a long time in Britain before it really gained traction. Its first big hit after a series of low budget thrillers and even some comedies was the Quatermass Experiment, which is a 50s sci-fi horror. And it was initially released with the correct spelling of experiment, beginning with an E. But it was given an X rating, and Hammer decided to capitalize on that, and so they dropped the E in experiment. So it's the Quatermass Experiment.
Oh my
so
God!
You know
really?
what
That's
you're
actually...
getting into.
That's pretty good. I had no idea.
That was in 1955. And horror in Britain at this time was pretty much dead in the water. As the film industry across the world was taking off, the UK made horror pretty much as regularly as the US or Germany or France did. But the production and distribution of horror films was banned during World War II for fear that the dark tones and grim messages would further damage morale. So that became the norm, and it took a while in the aftermath of the Second World War for horror to sort of pick up again. And Hammer with the Quatermass Experiment really got that going. They followed that up shortly thereafter with Curse of Frankenstein, a Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing take on it, and then Horror of Dracula, again with Cushing and Lee. So following the pattern that Universal did with Frankenstein and then Dracula, they got this going, and then they also had their version of The Mummy soon thereafter, and then they became really the dominant force in British cinematic horror for a while, churning out sequels of varying quality, and really exploiting their their X ratings quite a lot, and pushing the envelope to what you can get away with an X rating. Because Horror of Dracula, as surprising as this may sound, given the fact that it's pretty tame, was indeed rated X upon its release.
That's fascinating to me because, like, as we'll get into, this is definitely one of the sexier Draculas we've seen so far, but, like, as you said, very tame, especially compared to, like, a 70s X rating or a contemporary X rating. So what was your, like, your history with, like, Hammer films? Because I know you got a film degree in England.
I did, yeah.
He says ruefully.
My first Hammer horror movie I ever watched when I was a kid, I had a VHS copy of the Cushing and Lee version of The Mummy. The Universal Mummy with Boris Karloff, again, while iconic, is sort of like their Dracula, very, very boring. And the Hammer Mummy is not, and it's quite a lot more entertaining. But I didn't watch any of their other ones. I grew up watching all of the Universal horror movies, except for some reason the Hammer Mummy. Um, and then didn't engage fully in Hammer until much later in life. Um, and then it really took off, yeah, when I was in grad school. And sort of instead of working, I just binge watched Peter Cushing movies.
I love that for you. Really, I do.
And worked them into my scholarship. I was
Hell
like,
yeah, you
hey,
did.
look, it's British cinema.
Look, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Everything's coming up Melville.
Uh-huh. So when I that took off, one of my earliest Hammer movies I watched was, of course, Horror of Dracula, and it soon became my favorite Dracula. I think this is the best one that you're going to watch. Straight adaptation.
I accept this.
Um, and Cushing's Van Helsing is really the reason why for me. He is, bar none, the best cinematic monster hunter.
Honestly, like after watching this, because I hadn't seen this before, I think his performance definitely is the top of the film, like followed closely by Lee, but Lee doesn't have a lot to do, as we'll discuss. But I was really impressed by Peter Cushing in this, so I think your assessment there is accurate. Will, had you seen this before?
I had seen Horror of Dracula, I think once or twice before we approached it for the podcast. I'd watched it once, sort of back maybe around college, and then I watched it once with my friend in the depths of the pandemic, and we just needed something fun that was going to raise morale. Also, we're not going to apologize. You're going to maybe hear a pug barking in the background. That's Anna the pug. She'll do her thing. But yeah, I actually had not had a lot of experience with Hammer horror up to that point. I had heard it mentioned by my dad and other movie fans in reference to other things I'd seen, particularly stuff like the 2010 version of The Wolfman. But that sort of piqued my curiosity, but I never really explored it much until the last couple years. And so far, I've really only seen this and Curse of Frankenstein.
That's awesome. I'm excited to watch more of these because I really, especially the ones later, we talked a little bit about how this series goes places you could never expect. There's a lot of these Christopher Lee Draculas, and they get kind of like increasingly unhinged.
Yeah.
But I think once we do our kind of straighter adaptations and we wind up going into some just like things that feature Dracula as opposed to an adaptation of Dracula, we definitely need to do the 70s one that you mentioned, Chris. I cannot recall the title.
Dracula AD 1972.
Perfect. Perfect.
So, although while I like that they qualify that it is AD in there, not so as not to confuse you, I do think Dracula 1972 BC would also be worth watching.
Well, agreed. I would watch that in a fucking heartbeat.
Presumably,
why was that not just the natural follow-up?
Presumably, right? Before there was a Christian crucifix for him to be weak to, he had unlimited powers.
Yeah. Points have been made. Especially if he was still in England, where they wouldn't have used garlic because that's a spice. But thank you. Well, let's kind of jump into it then. Will, do you want to give us our production background and our cast here?
Absolutely. So I'm going to run down the cast for you real quick. As Count Dracula himself, we've got Christopher Lee in really one of the more iconic Dracula performances. Opposite him, we have Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. As Arthur Homewood, we have Michael Goff. Mina, who I think, if I'm in this version, Mina's the daughter of Homewood.
Yes.
Yep. Is played by Melissa Stribling. We have Carol Marsh as Lucy Homewood, and then we have Jonathan Van Eysen as Harker. Horror of Dracula was just Dracula in the UK and the rest of the world, even though it was really trying to directly rule the roost that, Universal had previously held. They did not want to create any confusion and think that they were just re-releasing the Universal movie, so they changed it to Horror of Dracula. This was really the movie also that jump-started Christopher Lee's career. Up to this point, he had been playing a lot of, I guess, quote-unquote, ethnic villain roles in small Hollywood and British cinema pieces, and this is what really catapulted him into being a cinematic icon. There are, I've seen a couple of the notes here that I've seen a lot of these, much like some other adaptations like Turkish Dracula. This also claims to be the first Dracula movie to feature fangs, which
wrong, incorrect.
Yes, completely untrue.
It's always wrong, no matter what.
Similarly, Terence Fisher is the director of this piece. Also claims that this is the first Dracula to heighten the sense of sexuality or explore sexuality in film. He is quoted saying, "My greatest contribution to the Dracula myth was to bring out the underlying sexual element in the story. He, Dracula, is basically sexual. At the moment he bites, it is the culmination of a sexual experience." Which is, one, Terence Fisher, untrue of film, but also
incorrect.
To bring out the underlying sexual elements, my guy. Guy, they're not even underlying, they're just lying.
That is not subtext, that is text.
It has always been kind of amazing to me how Christopher Lee is often thought of as the sexy Dracula. Especially in this movie where, well, I mean, for an X rating, let's just say he doesn't really get up to a whole lot.
He doesn't get up to a whole lot for an X rating or like in general. Like as we kind of hinted at, he is in this for a total of, I believe, 9 minutes. Like, it's a short film. It's a quick little one. It's like 82 minutes long, but he's not in a lot of it, and he does not have many lines. So I think it's funny that he had such a cultural impact, particularly in regards to the sexuality, when he has like 5 scenes total.
I think a check in his corner is that he's doing a performance of Dracula that is unlike a lot of the other ones we've seen, and that is because, according to the book, goth, undead subculture. Christopher Lee played this role without watching any previous iterations of Dracula, and just brought his own kind of natural charm and screen presence to the role. And I think that probably accounts for a lot of it. He would suffer in this role if he was just trying to do something either an imitation or a reaction to Lugosi's performance. So I feel like that adds to the overall perception of him being the sexy Dracula.
That makes sense to me. Also, like, Christopher Lee's handsome,
Yes.
Like, it's the nature of the thing.
Even if he's got bloodshot eyes and, blood all over his teeth, still got it.
Still got it. The first use of teeth in a Dracula. Shut the fuck up. Stop lying. Anyway, sorry. So, as Will mentioned, there are a couple of changes to the cast in this. So, this is our first in a lot of different ways. This is our first color film that we've been watching in this quest, which is great. This is also probably the most divergent in terms of plot. Like, this follows some of the beats, especially in the latter half, but the setup for this is different, and a lot of the cast has just been, like, shuffled around. So, Lucy is the sister of Arthur Holmwood, who is engaged to Harker. Mina is married to Arthur, and I think that's the main kind of, like, cast shuffling. Unfortunately for Will, we have no Quincy. Van Helsing has a much larger role in this than he does in the book, and that will kind of set the tone for a lot of Van Helsings we'll see in the future. And Seward is in this as well, but pretty... wait, or is Mina Arthur's daughter? I can't remember.
No, you said you got it right the first time. Yeah, so Arthur is married to Mina, and Lucy is Arthur's sister and is engaged to Harker.
Right. And, so a lot of relationship differences right off the bat.
But I mean, really, as you're watching it, the biggest change that comes is pretty early on in the movie. We have the classic opening that we get in just about every adaptation, with Harker arriving at Castle Dracula. In this instance, though, he's arriving to be Dracula's personal librarian, I believe, and we have some of the classic scenes, cutting himself and having Dracula react to the blood, meeting one of Dracula's brides. But then we soon learn, twist, that Harker isn't there to be a humble librarian. He's actually a professional monster slayer working for Van Helsing and is there to try to kill Dracula. Um, and it doesn't go very well. uh, no, I remember watching this for the first time and loving that twist and loving even more how they follow it up with Dracula just immediately killing Harker.
Yep.
Um,
So not only do we get a different profession for Harker, giving him much more oomph than usual, he is dead about 20 minutes in.
so we get rid of our young hotshot hero, and a lot of adaptations focus on Harker in that role. And the plot moves forward as Dracula, being kind of irritated by the fact that somebody came and tried to kill him, he travels to where Harker's family is and begins attacking the Holmwoods, which then pits Peter Cushing's Van Helsing in a defensive role, feeling very responsible for what's happened because he sent Harker to his death. Van Helsing steps in and tries to counteract Dracula in his attacks on the Holmwoods.
And then from then on, we get a lot of similar beats to the novel where Dracula attacks Lucy first. This time it feels much more direct, considering that Harker is already dead, and then attacking Mina after that. So Arthur kind of becomes our dual protagonist with Van Helsing in this, as opposed to Harker, as we discussed. And the rest, even though there are, obvious differences in the cast and their roles, does follow the general outline of Dracula, although the entirety of it takes place in England after the initial travel. So yeah, I really enjoyed watching this. There's a couple, I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about contemporary reviews and like current ones before we get into our personal reviews, but yeah, Will, if you want to take care of that, that'd be great.
So, Horror of Dracula actually had a very positive reception in America, at least amongst film critics, even if they have the same sort of looking down their nose at it perspective that a lot of horror films had at the time. Vincent Canby, writing for the Motion Picture Daily, had this to say: "The trio most responsible for this production, Micah Carreras, executive producer, Anthony Hines, producer, and Terrence Fisher, director, have had the good sense to treat their subject with as much honesty as is allowed within the horror fiction framework. Thus, while it's all fairly wild and woolly, it's also chillingly realistic in detail, and at times as gory as the law allows. In addition, the physical production is first-rate, including the setting, costumes, Eastman color photography, and special effects." They weren't all so sunny as this. The Sunday Dispatch, in 3 words, just called it dreary and inept.
Put that on the poster.
I love that. Yes, please do.
I heard that while American critics seem to have a lot of fun with this, that it was not as warmly received in its native country, at least by critics. I could not find examples of that. Luckily, Chris, it seems like you found more than enough.
Yeah, it was a tremendous box office success. And along with Curse of Frankenstein, really put them around the map. But it was almost universally panned by critics. They just hated it. And I did find some pretty good quotes from contemporary reviews in Britain. The reviewer for The Observer said, quote, I regret to hear that it is being shown in America with emphasis laid on its British origin, and feel inclined to apologize to all decent Americans for sending them a work in such sickening bad taste.
I love that.
The Daily Worker said, I came away revolted and outraged. For the Daily Sketch, we have Anthony Hines and his merry men have gone far enough. Dracula sounded a warning bell. One step further, and the license permitted by the censor's X certificate will be dangerously abused. Um, that that reviewer was, of course, completely right on that on that front. Hammer did keep pushing the limits of the X certificate, and if you fast forward 10 years, or 20, then yes, I think the works sent to America are in even more sickening bad taste, but I love them. The Daily Telegraph said, this British film has an X certificate. This is too good for it. There should be a new certificate, S for sadistic, or just D for disgusting. I must add that the film has been efficiently produced and well acted. So,
oh fuck! That's
following up the marketing from the Quatermass experiment, and then with all of these reviews focusing on how apparently disgusting and violent the movie was, a lot of film scholars in retrospect have suggested that the horrible reviews probably actually helped it at the box office.
Definitely, for sure.
People wanted to go see what all the hubbub was about. And yeah, it was a smash hit in the UK.
It is, and I am very sorry for saying these words, the human centipede effect, if you will. Yeah, something I will never watch, but a lot of people love to be disgusted. So hearing about something will put it in the welcome spotlight.
If you want to be well and truly disgusted, just watch this 1958, probably in today's parlance PG rated vampire movie.
Like seriously, it is PG-13 at the absolute most.
They saw Dracula run and jump over a table and nearly fell out of their seat. That was too much for them.
There's a lot of action in the climax.
Yeah. I always refer to this as like the running Dracula, because it feels like Dracula and Van Helsing are always just running and like jumping over things, chasing each other.
It's so good though. And I do have to agree with the reviews when they talk about the production, because this film looks fucking great. I love the look of films from this era. They're so lush, and the production on this is amazing. The set is so opulent and very post-war lavish, even though it is, supposedly takes place in the 1880s. It has a very early mod look to it in a lot of ways. And I really loved how this looked. The costuming was amazing. And Christopher Lee's makeup was really, really good and effective. Like you talked about, Will, the bloodshot eyes and the actual blood looks pretty good. I mean, it looks like you're watching an old movie, but for the time, I'm impressed.
And then those killer practical effects at the very end.
Yes, dude. There's a lot of really good prop work in this. The climactic fight between Van Helsing and Dracula results in Dracula being pushed into a ray of sunlight and turning into dust, leaving his skeleton behind, but in a almost stop motion animated way. But it looks fucking great. I really, really enjoyed the production of this, and I am always looking at costuming. So even though this has a kind of has a stuffiness to it because it's supposed to take place in the 1880s, and the British are the British, it still really really looks good. Will, I'm sure you took note of all of the excellent coats on the men.
Everyone is so dripped down in this movie. I want every coat that anyone wears in this.
As you should.
Peter Cushing's got this number with like a big furry collar. It's incredible.
Choice, absolutely choice.
He also
Yeah.
gets to wear the classic Peter Cushing smoking jacket in one scene, and
Oh,
he just I
yes.
love his informal wear in all of these movies because he always just looks so damn good.
Mhm.
Right?
As someone who just pulled out his own velvet smoking jacket for New Year's Eve festivities, I can really appreciate
You
it.
can appreciate a smoking jacket. I love that for you.
Oh yeah, love a smoking
Yep.
jacket on film.
I feel like spiritually I should have a smoking jacket, but I'm actually not that fancy. Like I'd have like a smoking Carhartt, you know. Like, I'll just be doing the smoking part of smoking jacket, and we'll leave it at that.
Just like a nice velvet pair of
Yeah,
coveralls.
exactly. My velvet coveralls, or my like velvet ashtray, which would not be a fire hazard at all. I have been collecting vintage ashtrays though, and so if either Addie or I get murdered, you guys know where the weapon is just immediately.
Yep. Velvet Ashtray would be an incredible name for like a lounge leisure cover act for
Yeah.
Velvet
Holy
Underground.
shit! Yes. Ew, come and seal man. Anyway, that was my like really bad. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of Peter Cushing, I guess we should start with the star of this show in terms of his performance is motherfucking Peter Cushing. Holy cow. This man did an amazing job with Van Helsing, and kind of turns him into both a younger version of Van Helsing. We're used to seeing kind of like old Dutch men. And Peter Cushing is extremely suave, very charming, and a man of action. And we're not used to seeing that in these movies. And I was really enthralled by his performance.
The thing that really makes it is his ability to string together all of these different attributes into one complete character. I feel like Van Helsing is often pigeonholed into one thing or another and winds up being very flat. Either he's a stuffy academic or he's Hugh Jackman with a crossbow. And Cushing's Van Helsing brings in the scholarship, the action, and mixes it with a very gentlemanly demeanor and also instances of real, genuine human warmth. So he comes away feeling like a real human being, in a way that you probably aren't expecting when you go into watching a 50s Hammer Horror Dracula movie.
Yeah, no. Like, you're not expecting that at all. You're just expecting, like, schlocky shit. Schlocky schlit. Because, like, yeah, that's, like, kind of the general vibe of these movies. But I think your point about human warmth is really salient. There's a scene that all three of us talked about when we didn't record this before, where they are laying a trap for Mina, who is in the process of being transformed into a vampire. And there is a child that he saves from Mina and, like, takes a moment after he's going to chase Mina to, like, put his coat around this kid and, like, make sure the kid's okay before being like, okay, off to do action stuff. And that's such a small detail that says so much about the character. And it really stuck with all of us. But yeah, you also kind of get the a little bit of the Bond effect here. Like, he's very suave and very much a leading man, but not a womanizer, but he's who people watching this would be attracted to. Christopher Lee definitely is up there, but I think that in terms of, you know, your general audience, he's supposed to be the star, in my opinion.
He's a great choice for the hero of the film.
Yeah, exactly.
And where up to this point, Van Helsing is often, you know, favored as a helper character who appears at the end. But Harker is the Hollywood hero type. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, contrasting a British production with an American production, that instead of the young cowboy type. They are preferring a well-dressed, well-spoken man in his 40s who
Yep, that completely
knows
tracks.
what's going on, you know? And he's not a romantic lead. He's just there to kind of get the job done.
Yeah, exactly. And then next to him, who is our kind of secondary protagonist, is Michael Gough as Arthur. And I really enjoyed his performance too. We've had a lot of either absent or fairly milquetoast Arthurs until now. And he did a really good job with this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really like Michael Gough in this role. I think he, a lot of the times, particularly in the early part of the film, is acting as, I'd say the straight man, but let's be real, this is a British
They're all
horror
straight.
movie. They're all the straight man.
yeah.
There's no cut up in this, but it is Michael Gough's job as Holmwood to be apoplectic about all of the stuff that Van Helsing is suggesting they do to take care of the vampire. And I think that is difficult to make that a character you're invested in. But you get there in the end. Once he knows what is happening and what he's up against, he and Van Helsing start to form a bond, and he really starts to become a man of action.
The scene where they stake Lucy is really well performed by everybody, and especially works very nicely as a turning point for Holmwood.
Because he's just seen his sister die,
Yeah.
and I think that's actually a weakness of Lucy in some other adaptations, is that, she's involved and, engaged to Holmwood, but they don't really have any scenes together, and there's no real sense of connection between her and anyone except for Mina. So to see here as a brother and sister thing, I think is actually a good change on the part of the script.
I agree. And the choice to do the kind of a before and after staking shot, where before Van Helsing drives the stake in, she's monstrous, she's a vampire, and the act of killing her sort of restores her to just being a human corpse. And that's what Holmwood sees and what convinces him that Van Helsing is doing the right thing. And especially following the great scene with Tanya. It just all comes together very nicely.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And I also really like how this, in a way, set him up a little bit to be Alfred in the Tim Burton Batmans.
Oh yeah, I feel like that was almost certainly directly because of roles like this.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like Tim Burton must have just been watching Hammer horror movies and just remembered the actors he loved from them.
Yeah.
To everyone's benefit, he's wonderful in those movies.
Would I check out a Peter Cushing Alfred? I would.
Always.
Oh wow,
It's a good call.
It's funny because I think a lot of our audience, if you haven't seen any Hammer horror movies, it's fair to say your experience with Peter Cushing is likely just as Grand Moff Tarkin in the first Star Wars movie. And I mean, if that is your only exposure to him as an actor, it might be kind of a surprise what kind of warmth and sort of gentle humility he brings to a lot of roles, especially as Van Helsing, because in Star Wars, he is playing this very commanding, very cold and calculating figure who's with just a hint of a sort of arch or fey thing about him, but you're not getting the depths of humanity that you see in this movie.
Oh, I remember, encountering a handsome, young, suave Peter Cushing for the first time. Again, also primarily having Star Wars as a reference point and being really...
Was that formative for you, Chris?
Yes.
Yes.
And he very quickly catapulted to just being one of my all-time favorite actors. I really love Peter Cushing, if that hasn't come across yet.
As you should. He does a great job. And then in terms of our leading women, we have Melissa Stribling as Mina. I'm neutral on Mina in this. I think she's, in order to contrast Lucy and some of the sexuality she brings, they play Mina a little too stuffy, in my opinion. She's a little older in this, and she is much more deferent to Arthur as he's her husband in this version. So I wasn't like super impressed both with the script and the performance. She does a good job later, as most of our more boring Minas do. Once they begin to turn, you get to see a glimpse of a more interesting performance. But meh. What about you guys?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I feel bad. I do not remember very much of her performance.
That's valid. It's not very interesting.
Which I think is, which maybe speaks volumes of it. I do remember more about Carol Marsh as Lucy, because I think she gets to bring something interesting to her role once she's turned. And as she's being turned, in a lot of, I think maybe the director's claims that this is the first movie to explore sexuality is a little overblown, but it's really one of the first one to explore vampirism as a analogy for addiction, because there's a lot of this sort of pained, anxious look on Lucy's face as Dracula's approaching her, or as she's being turned, and as she's being kept from blood, that you don't see in a lot of other films in this era. You definitely could not show that kind of stuff in a 30s movie. So she does actually get to bring something new to the table.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Carol Marsh does a fantastic job. And this is one of the very rare Dracula adaptations where Lucy really outshines Mina.
Mm-hmm. Completely in agreement. I particularly like the scene where, I think it's one of Lucy's first scenes, and it's Dracula's first scene in England, where there's kind of like a fun reverse seduction where she goes to her bedroom and opens her doors completely and then just lays down and waits. And something about the way that they filmed that and her acting and the appearance of Lee, that really was a great scene, and it's a fun way to do that, as opposed to like your very one-sided like predator prey situation. Like, it was much more entangled and interesting in this version. And that leaves us with our main cast, with the man himself, Christopher Lee. Those of you who have not seen him in anything in his extremely long and illustrious career, you may recognize him as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movies. But he is an extremely prolific actor, and this is one of his more iconic roles, even though, as we said, he is not in a lot of this movie, is he?
No, he is just in a handful of scenes, it's 7 or 8 minutes total, I think, and he doesn't have a word of dialogue after the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, he has a brief exchange with Harker, and he's great. Like, he's extremely suave and charming. And then all of his scenes in England are either action or borderline sex. And that is it. I mean, obviously he does a great job. Like, it's a role that a lot of people recognize him for. But it's kind of funny to me that this is very much billed as like Christopher Lee as Count Dracula, when there's not a lot going on here. And it kind of reflects the same way that people at the time this came out talked about this being like so offensive and so gory and so sexual, when to a modern audience this is like unbelievably tame. In terms of, and I guess we should talk about, the points of this being, the quote, sexy Dracula. I think you do see hints of that, particularly in the scenes with Lee and Carol Marsh and later Melissa Stribling, where it's much more of a sexual thing than a violent thing. And like in ones in the past, we kind of get like the courtesy cut with the cape, and we get that once or twice, but you see a little more in this version than you do in some of the later ones. In some of the earlier ones. But yeah, I definitely just thought it was interesting how much people talk about the sexuality in this coming from Christopher Lee.
I and this is just coming to me thinking about it. I think maybe a part of it is the fact that he is in so little of this movie, because when you see him, he's all business.
That's true.
You know, the other Draculas, they have a lot more dialogue, and they can really either make it or lose it with that dialogue, because I think there's something about an air of mystery to this Dracula. Have you ever met someone who's really hot and then they open their mouths and you're just like, why was I attracted to you? I think that might be a thing here, and that's not to say that his lines are bad, but you know, this Dracula is all about just going after the things that he wants in this way that is very efficient and scary, and I think probably kind of hot if you're into that kind of thing. But the other thing is he doesn't have any scenes where he's just standing around in a brightly lit parlor room just kind of saying some vaguely spooky sounding bullshit like you get in some of the Universal versions, where instead of being mysterious, he just sort of sounds like a pickup artist.
No!
Yeah, so I think maybe the fact that he's just kind of got this dangerous, brooding look and does not say much really kind of helps his case.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's a great assessment. And you're exactly right. I'm thinking of those scenes in the Universal Dracula when Bela Lugosi is just kind of chit-chatting with Van Helsing for a while. And we don't get any of that. When Dracula, the Dracula in this movie is trying to seduce the women and kill the men, and that's all he does for 82 minutes.
Yeah, that completely tracks. And I also think it's like very funny that he's already killed Harker, and then he comes to England anyway, just to be like, oh, also to like pour salt in the wound after you're fucking dead, I'm gonna fuck your wife. Like, yeah. Jesus. This is rude, dude. But yeah, that's kind of our cast there. Overall, I freaking enjoyed the hell out of this. I had such a fun time watching it, because I had a very vague idea of what I was getting into, but now I am hooked on the aesthetic of the Hammer horror films, and I am very much looking forward to watching more of them and see them become like increasingly unhinged.
Oh man, they go to some crazy places, including 1972.
After AAD, just in case you were wondering. Yeah. God.
The year of our Lord, 1972.
Yes.
We will need to have you on as we explore more of these further down the line of the show.
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to diving into these. I love the aesthetic of them. I love the fact that instead of looking like a woodblock print like older movies or expressionism, I love that they kind of look more like an oil painting. These are just a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see more of them.
And the sequels definitely contribute to Christopher Lee's reputation as the sexy Dracula, for sure.
Yeah, I did know that. Especially once we get into the 70s, because we have a whole list of Draculas from the 70s, and they're all going to be so much. They're all going to be so much. But like a couple of like random things that I didn't really know where to put into this, like some details from the novel that I was really excited about. We finally got to see a blood transfusion on screen, which was very important in the novel in terms of, thematically and as a plot device. And we have yet to see one, so I was really excited to see that. And I also really liked that we got like a good old cross burn with Mina, where she touches a crucifix and gets it burnt onto her hand, and it actually is a pretty good makeup effect for the time.
Yeah. Which is a good, having the context is looking at your notes and just seeing good old crossburn finally.
Yep, finally.
Maybe has a different connotation without...
Oh my god!
Without that bit of...
Wait, I just got it. Oh no. We're going to change that to crucifix in case anybody finds this and puts on the internet that I'm in the clan. Okay. Anyway, moving along. Oh, God. But yeah, great prop work and makeup in this movie. Any other like bits and bobs you guys wanted to bring up before we get into our segments and your own personal reviews?
My last thought as an adaptation is how, for all of the character edits they make, one of the most interesting choices for me is that there's no Renfield.
Yeah, none. And we haven't seen him in a while, actually. Yeah. He's been cut from our last couple of movies, which is too bad. We love a crazy little man, but alas.
Yeah. There's just no place for him in
it wouldn't
adaptation.
Work to have a Renfield.
No, it wouldn't.
But I think he would definitely sort of cramp Dracula's style.
You know what? I completely
as
agree with that.
as wingmen go,
he's not a great
would not
one.
be very good.
Maybe do better than the guy who likes to eat flies.
Yeah, and it also just doesn't fit with the tone of this at all. So I kind of forgot that we didn't have him.
Yeah, because the movie just flows so well without him. You don't really feel the absence.
And then, like as Will said, like it leaves Dracula as a singular force, which is in some ways a lot scarier.
In a lot of the sequels, he'll have a helper.
Just a little guy?
Well, normally not a Renfield type, but sometimes. And they rarely work for me.
Yeah, no, that's valid. Will, anything from you?
No, I think that wraps it up pretty well for me.
Hell yeah. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this, especially for my introduction to the oeuvre. So I guess then that brings us to our segments. The first being, where would we rank this Dracula? I'm inclined to put him towards the top, definitely in the top 3. I think I'm going to put him in at place number 2 after Bela Lugosi, just because there's more to work with. Like, there's more to analyze with Bela, just because he's on screen a lot more. But this performance, even though limited by screen time, is a powerhouse, like, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to what Christopher Lee does with very little time, that we are both in agreement with him being in the number 2 slot. He doesn't have a lot to say, but he makes the most of the time that he has.
Yeah, his physical acting is really good too. Like he's genuinely very imposing. And I know there's a quote from him somewhere where he's like, "I didn't want to do the like black tie and tails Dracula that's been done before," and I think you can see that in the way that he carries himself. He's very suave, but much less stiff. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the next thing to do would be to pick some notes of each other's. So we watched this together on a Netflix party and had the live chat up. So the way I did notes this time was to screenshot some of the live chat from you two. Sorry. So Chris, my note for you, excuse me, is I feel like I've never read The World of Evil before. Should we? Which I love. And then Will, you mentioned this a little bit before, but it is my note for you. One of the things that stuck with me in this movie is that dudes be running.
Dudes be running.
Dudes really be running in this movie everywhere. We jumping on shit, we punching people in the face, and not just some random guy at the bar like in Dracula of Istanbul, but we really be punching. Will, do you have any for me?
Yep, I'm here. I was looking through yours, and I was trying to find the note, because I know we both made some comments about one of Dracula's brides who's rocking a mullet in the beginning of the movie. And I think that might be the note in here of yours that just says, "Who the fuck is this lady?"
Because, like, again, it's the same thing, like, due to budget cuts, Dracula now only has one bride. So she's just, like, around and not introduced in the same way, and fully has a mullet and a, like, weird toga on. So, like, who the fuck is this lady? It's a great question. Thank you. Well, before we kind of close out here with our reading of the tweet, Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. Your insight was invaluable, and it is always good to just chit-chat with you about movies, and we will obviously have you back on when we watch more of this completely deranged series.
Thank you for inviting me again.
You're so welcome for the first time. And this week, I think, Will, is it your turn to read or mine?
You know, it was my turn. I actually have, rather than a tweet, I have some business I want to bring up in response to our mailbag
Oh my
episode.
God, yes. Holy shit.
Get through this
Can I
quickly.
chime in really quickly on that point before you say anything? Just
yes,
flawless
please.
Muppet casting, Will, with Raul Julia. It's just...
Right?
Thank you so much.
It's the only way forward. Time travel.
Yep,
Yeah.
agreed.
We have two pieces of business, both of which come from my friend Michaela, a noted Cancer son. This is important because she takes umbrage with our slotting of Harker as a Cancer. One, Cancers equals man baby, and they're like 5 exclamation points. Man baby was the word that you used.
Oops, sorry.
Tell Colleen I challenge her to a duel.
Noted. Understood.
Yeah, so you have that to look forward to, that duel. She also has notes regarding Rocky. One simply must mention that Rocky Balboa, as a good Catholic boy, would never be walking around without a crucifix. Thus, like all good Catholics, he has an edge on the Drac.
That's valid. I did not actually think of that, so...
You're so right, yeah.
Michaela.
Yeah, that crucifix is everywhere in that first movie in his costume design.
And we should also link, like when you put up the social images for this, Will, was it Chase who made a Muppet Dracula movie poster for you?
Oh no, that was Michaela, who you will be dueling soon. Yes.
Okay, so we need to put that up there because it's completely delicious, and it's beautifully done, and also includes my number one contribution, which was Gonzo's chickens as the brides.
Yeah, that was
Thank you. I'm really excited about that. But that was such a fun episode, and we have decided that we're going to do those kind of whenever we finish like an era of film. So we'll probably do a couple more 50s and 60s ones, and then do another mailbag for more Muppet nonsense. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And to to close out, I will be reading a tweet. For a while there, we were like, oh God, if Twitter dies, how are we going to close the podcast? But it's still going, baby. This comes from @Rajan Delman, and it says, Dracula is a sex symbol because the most sensual thing you can do is mind control the rat population of a metropolitan borough. Very, very good. And with that, we will catch you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.